Before Rosa Parks, before the Little Rock Nine, even before Martin Luther King Jr.'s nonviolent protest, 16-year-old Barbara Rose Johns, born March 6, 1935 in Harlem, New York, led her classmates in a strike to protest unfair conditions of her segregated high school. Johns had African-American parents who migrated to the United States to find work. She had 4 siblings, 1 younger sister named Joanne and 3 younger brothers named Ernest, Robert, and Roderick. My sister was sort of an introvert, and she stayed to herself a lot. She was very studious, always reading books and going to the woods to, I guess, meditate. She never told me anything, and afterwards I questioned her and asked her why she didn't mention it. And she said it was because she couldn't afford to tell anyone because it may have gotten out and it had to be a secret. Joanne Jones Cobb. When World War II began, Barbara's father joined the Army, so her mother took Barbara and her siblings to live on her grandmother's farm in Virginia, where she spent most of her childhood. In 1950, Barbara was a sophomore at Robert Russa Montan High School, the only black high school in Farmville, Virginia. The conditions in her high school were tragic. The school was designed to hold 180 students in 1939, but it had 477. The classrooms were built with tar paper to handle the overflow of students. African American students got everything as hand-me-downs from the white schools. Oftentimes they had negative comments in the margins of the textbooks and papers torn out. Since the school didn't have a gym, the football players would have to get dressed on the bus, which was also handed down after the white schools retired them. One day, the bus broke down on a railroad track and a train rammed its rear. This accident killed 5 students, including one of Barbara's best friends. It wasn't until 65 years ago that school segregation had been declared unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court. Johns had been inspired to take a stand against the inequality and injustice by her uncle Vernon Johns. He always encouraged her to study African American history.
We wanted so much here and had so little, and we had talents and abilities here that weren't really being realized, and I thought that was a tragic shame. And that's basically what motivated me to want to see some change take place here.
Barbara's music teacher, Inez Davenport, was one of the very few people she trusted. When she discussed the conditions of the school with Miss Davenport said to her, "Why don't you do something about it?" With that statement, Barbara said she decided to think about that. She tried to come up with a plan of what she could do to get a better school. She decided to consult with 4 other students. Between them, they came up with the plan for the school strike. She thought it was time that blacks were treated equally with whites, time that they had a decent school, time for the students themselves to do something about it. There wasn't any fear. She just thought, this is your moment, seize it. On April 23, 1951, the day of the walkout, Principal M. Boyd Jones was lured off the campus and received a phone call. Muffled voices told him that several of his students were causing trouble. As the principal rushed out the doors, teachers received notice of a school-wide assembly. Teachers led their classes to the auditorium. When the curtain raised, Barbara Johns was standing on the assembly stage.
When we got to the assembly, Barbara came in and walked up on the stage, and I remember saying to myself, what is going on? Why is she up there? And she started to talk, and she was talking so forcefully, and she told us about how the conditions were very bad at the school, and she needed everyone's cooperation, and she realized this was a surprise, but they had to keep it that way so that it wouldn't leak, and that only a few people knew about it.
What do you want to do? We want to strike. When do you want to strike? Today, and all this. So it really was a rallying situation.
She announced that the assembly was for students and asked the teachers to wait outside. She then passionately argued for a student strike. After she finished, the entire student body walked out and began protesting at the school. It did not last long, however. Word came down that the students were trespassing on school property and would be arrested if they didn't leave immediately. The strike lasted 2 weeks, with the minister Rev. L. Francis Griffin giving constant support to the students throughout. During the strike, the students met up with the white superintendent, who told them that Monton was just as nice as any other school in Prince Edward County and that the money was being used by the school board for a larger building. Fed up with this nonsense, the students called the NAACP office in Richmond, who sent out 2 lawyers, Oliver Hill and Spotswood Robinson, to review the situation. The lawyers told the student protesters that they could only take on their case if they demanded full integration with the white school. After careful deliberation, the students and their parents agreed to file a lawsuit to integrate the Prince Edward County school system. This case was called Davis versus Prince Edward. The following year, the U.S. District Court sided with the school board. This led to the Brown versus Board of Education U.S. Supreme Court case. In the United States, the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in school systems was greeted with mixed feelings of hope and skepticism by African Americans. John Henrik Clark. Shortly after the Brown versus Board of Education ruling, the Johns family got a call that their house burned down. Because of the strike, her family was concerned for Barbara's safety regarding threats by local racist groups, so they sent Barbara to live and finish her schooling in Montgomery, Alabama.
I remember sitting in my seat and sort of cowering down because I couldn't believe it, first of all. First reaction I had was fear. I thought, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to us now?
A lot of people were scared. Some of Barbara's closest friends were scared to death for her. They said, why did you do that? She says, we have to make a change. And I mean, right now. Barbara was very dynamic when she wasn't quiet.
On May 1st, 1959, Prince Edward County refused to desegregate and shut down all of its schools to prevent integration. The parents of the white students set up private schools for their children to attend, but the black students had nowhere to go. In 1963, the NAACP and other civil rights groups created privately funded free schools open for all students on an integrated basis. In March of 1964, lawyers argued Griffin versus School Board of Prince Edward County in the Supreme Court. The court ruled in favor of Griffin in a 6-2 decision. I don't believe Barbara knew anything about the fact that her walkout, would change the course of history. However, I remember her being so excited and shouting about it when the decision came down and we heard about it. I don't think she knew that what she and other students did would have any kind of impact on the nation that resulted in the Brown versus Board of Education case. Joanne Jones Cobb. The majority opinion written by Justice Hugo Black asserted that the school board of Prince Edward County had violated 14th Amendment by denying equal protection or opportunity. The court asserted that even though local government controlled public education, they could not close public schools because citizens have the right to free, accessible education. In 1964, an estimated 1,500 students returned to public schools in Prince Edward County. In 1954, the Farmville case became one of the 5 cases that the U.S. Supreme Court reviewed in Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, when school segregation was triumphantly declared unconstitutional. In so many ways, segregation shaped me and education liberated me. Maya Angelou. Sometimes a courageous act by one person can set in motion a series of events that bring justice to an entire nation. After graduating from high school, she attended Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, and ultimately graduated from Drexel University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Barbara Johns went on to lead a quiet life. She married Reverend William Powell, raised 5 children, and became a librarian in the Philadelphia Public Schools. In 1991, Barbara Rose Johns Powell tragically died from cancer, but her legacy will always live on in this country. If we were to look back and how we were in 1955, living in Jim Crow, living in segregation, living in segregated schools, it's hard to believe that it was America, but it really was. Anna DeVere Smith. Barbara will always be remembered for her bravery, taking a stand against the tragedy of school segregation and racial injustice and turning it into a triumph of integrated schools, same rights, and proper education for all students no matter what race.